The Terracotta Army is often referred to as the eighth wonder of the world. Curious visitors from all over the world come to Xi'an to see this extraordinary ancient spectacle, and they're always amazed by what they see. These fierce eyes have stared forward like this for more than 2,000 years. When you look them in the eye, you can still feel a sense of intimidation from the intensity of their stare. The history and culture of the Qin and Han dynasties have long been a focus of research in China, but personally getting the chance to walk amongst the Terracotta Army and experience the powerful presence of the soldiers is really something else. This is the army of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. Each terracotta soldier was modeled on an actual warrior that was serving in the great army of the Qin dynasty. When you look closely at them, you can truly appreciate the intricacy of the details on each one. It's a scene that inspires the imagination. Their posture tells us they would have had various kinds of weaponry.
那么我们来看这只手，他们拿的什么武器呢？他们是怎么打仗的呢？
What kind of army do these 2,000-year-old terracotta figures represent?
像这个武器，我们可以判断它是这样拿着一个武器。这个环实际上是射程弓箭的箭头，这是钉，固定甲片与甲片之间的这个钉子。
The great army of the Qin dynasty was, in its time, the most powerful military force in the East. Yet the state of Qin began as a small state in remote northwestern China. Strengthened by warfare over hundreds of years, the state of Qin was well prepared for the bitter fighting of the Warring States period. Ultimately, Qin defeated all its enemies and became the first state to unify all of China. This army, known as the Fierce Masters of War, fought battles wherever they went. They fought off nomadic tribes in the west of China and crushed all 6 warring states in the east. They were also successful in conquering the south and the Huns in the northern regions.
这是一支沉睡了2000年的一支军队，一支铁军。
But how powerful was this massive army? What do we know about the secrets beneath all this military might? At around the same time this ancient army in the east emerged from the remote western mountains and unified China, on the other side of the world, the Romans spread out from the mountainous Apennine Peninsula to dominate Europe. History tells us that the Romans were aware of their limitations from the beginning. Intellectually, they inherited everything from the Greeks. Physically, they were no match for the Celts. Technologically, they couldn't compete with the Etruscans, and economically, they were inferior to the Carthaginians. So, how then were the Romans able to build an empire that lasted over 1,000 years? The factor that made possible Roman hegemony in Europe, Africa, and Asia was the formidable Roman legion. Its reputation alone struck terror into the hearts of Rome's enemies.
这是图拉真济公柱上的一块浮雕，是一幅战斗场面，明显的看出来罗马人还有他的敌人达契亚人。
However formidable their enemies, the Romans never feared them, and the more battles they won, the braver they became. The Romans engaged in wars for hundreds of years, and they grew from being an underdog in southern Europe to the superpower of the West. The Roman legion fought against any and all odds, and they conquered all in their path. So how exactly did the Romans go about writing their history? What were the great military exploits that established the reputation of their legendary armies? A nation is not simply born to be powerful. There had to be certain factors in play that enabled the state of Qin and the early Romans to outwit their rivals and emerge as the military superpowers of their day. To answer our questions, we're traveling from Changan to Rome. We want to find out what makes a nation powerful in both ancient and modern times.
历史在这儿抛给了我们一个充满悬念的谜团。
This blacksmith in Zhouji, Shanxi is known for making all kinds of ancient weapons. We've come here to learn some of the secrets behind the power of the Qin army.
是不是方天画戟？
薛平贵拿的。
薛平贵啊，你这都是唐代的是吧？啊。
Weapons often mentioned in ancient stories such as spears, halberds, hatchets and hooks can all be found here. Knowing why we've come here, Wang, a native of Shanxi, decides to make a weapon that was typical of those used by the great Qin army.
王师傅，您这做的是什么？
这叫戈，根据那个秦始皇兵马俑出土的那个戈的样子打的。
哦，你的根据是在秦始皇兵马俑。
哦。
We're trying to recreate the same dagger axe that would have been used by the Qin army. 2,000 years ago, it was an invincible weapon.
它地下仓库的包装间，是我们在这儿就看几件很珍贵的军事文物。哦，这就是戈，这种光亮是当时就有
原有的，对对对，出土就是这么光亮，经过分析的话，表面有一层铬盐氧化物。
我们在图片上也看到这个，但是真正脸对脸还让人兴奋不一样。
Chrome plating has always been considered a new technology that emerged in the 20th century. Yet, people of the Qin dynasty were using this technique to prevent rust forming more than 2,000 years ago.
这个柄是这么装，
后边也能够使用，因为你看，
它这个角是非常锋利的。
对对对，可以勾，甚至啄，
啄，对，
这还可以推，推。
这个武器是综合的，寒光刺人的。
So why did Qin people choose this type of weapon? Some experts believe the dagger axe was developed from farm tools such as the sickle and axe. By simply fixing it on a long staff, it can be used as an assault weapon, and this means a farmer can handle it as easily as the farm tool he was so familiar with. As Qin soldiers were mostly farmers, this made it very easy to adapt to. As dagger axes were made of bronze, they were far cheaper to make than a sword or saber, and this is the primary reason why dagger axes became so widely used. On the battlefield, foot soldiers swung their dagger axes with great force, in much the same way they would a hoe in the fields. Chariot-borne warriors used the dagger axe to cut down the enemy, as they would cut down wheat during the harvest season. No other weapon came close to the dagger axe. Its effectiveness, low cost and ready availability made it a simple yet very lethal weapon. And this is why the dagger axe was the Qin army's weapon of choice. For the emerging Qin Empire, the dagger axe was the right weapon for the right time. During the same period, the Roman army also discovered their ideal weapon, but it came at a particularly bloody price.
这里是古罗马决斗士学校，下面呢，我带大家去看一个秘密。
And now there is the most famous sword. This is Gladius. Is a particular sword. It's very short. Please.
这是一个罗马短剑。
This is about 60 centimeters, and the heavy is 1 kilo, 1 kilo and a half.
They were very confident of their invincibility, so when they were defeated by Spanish tribes who used this type of short sword, it came as a real surprise. What is it that makes this sword so lethal?
It is easy to move and pull to me, so I can kill with the short arm. You don't kill me with the long sword.
这个剑，罗马人把它学过来，成了罗马军队近身格斗的一个有力武器。
This short sword that originated from Spanish tribes turned out to be exactly what the Roman legion had been looking for. The Romans had fared poorly in battle whenever they were confronted with spears, which were at the time the most common weapon in Europe. Their defeat made them realize that they needed to bring the enemy in as close as possible with shorter weapons. It had already been proven that in close combat, heavy weaponry was no match for the flexibility of a dagger. So when this new kind of weapon was adopted by the Romans, it posed a major threat to their enemies. Eventually, these daggers were always worn on the waists of all Roman soldiers as a symbol of their history of great victories. There's an old Chinese saying that goes, "Taking the time to sharpen your axe will not slow down the cutting of the wood." Only with an easy-to-use and effective weapon could a soldier fully utilize his strength in battle. In the case of the Qin dynasty dagger axe and the Roman gladius, warriors of both ancient civilizations made choices that suited them best. Only by adopting these swords could they dominate the battlefield. However, a truly invincible army needed more than just one kind of weapon. The museum at the site of Emperor Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum was one of the first top-class national museums founded in China. Here one can find out more about the great Qin army's most powerful weapon.
这个就是弩机，这我认识。
弓弦拉起来勾在这个钩牙上，然后这个是望山瞄准，
瞄准器，
然后这个是扳机了。
扳机，
有了弩的话，就射程一个一个准确度。
准确度，对，它是一个像望山瞄准儿。由弓箭发展到弩机，这是中国兵器的独特历史。
It was during the Warring States period of ancient China that the crossbow was initially invented and used in actual combat. After the unification of China, the Qin crossbow was improved upon thanks to the collective craftsmanship of all 6 states. But its power is still a mystery.
我手里拿的这个枪，就是叫头枪，是罗马士兵的标配。
The Romans true can use only one type. The important is when the spear arrive or kill or not kill, the spear divided in 2 parts. The enemy don't throw back. It's easy.
Teach me.
Very back and after through.
Very back.
Yes. More power. More power is possible. Because it's too heavy and go across the shield.
Legend has it that the Roman javelin was deliberately designed to be disposable. The fact that the enemy couldn't take it and reuse it made it even more dangerous. But just how deadly was it? In the era of cold weapons, the battlefield was ruled by archers. The crossbow and javelin represent 2 different types of offensive tactics. Now we're going to test the power of these ancient killing tools.
这都是秦始皇兵马俑出土的弩的那个资料上复制下的啊，
费了不少功夫吧？
用了36天才把它做起。
嚯，一个多月。
There are no historical records that explain how a Qin crossbow was used, but by conducting experiments we can find out for ourselves. It's now possible to shoot a crossbow just as a Qin archer would have done more than 2,000 years ago.
那咱们试一试。哇，你这动作是绝章啊！
对，因为那个紧小点拉不动。好，把这个这哦，这是那个瞄准器，中间这槽子啊，
那中间这个槽。
哎呀，射中了！
我看。
来，
王师傅，这是个几何板？
这是9合板。
哇，射穿了，2层板都射透了，而且透过去1寸多。好家伙，这是实际上是18层的胶合板，这个力量绝对是够了。基本上古代的这个铠甲没有这个厚，也没有这个硬度。
A blow like this is equal to a dozen tons of weight concentrated on the sharp arrowhead. At the split second of penetration, there's nothing that can withstand it.
力量很大。
还有3层。
还有3层，我能不能试试，看看这3层我能不能射穿？
Historical records reveal that the reason Qin soldiers were so successful on the battlefield was because of their crossbows. It was always the bowmen and crossbowmen that bore the brunt of fighting in battle. In fact, many soldiers of all 6 states in the Warring States period were killed without even seeing the face of their enemy. They were slaughtered by Qin crossbows.
居然被脱靶！
哎呀，射穿了。
就我这个剑法也射穿了，哇，真是杀伤力很大，但是就是像我这样的人拿起来就能射，所以这就是他的一个很大的长处。他训练起来简单，所以一个农民、一个生手马上可以上手，这太厉害了。
It isn't hard to imagine what happened on the battlefield 2,000 years ago when the Qin unleashed volleys of arrows on the enemy. How deadly were the javelins used by the Roman legion?
在今天的陕西，有人专门复制了罗马的头枪。那么，就让我们来看看罗马头枪的杀伤力。
Although the range is not as good as that of a crossbow, this heavy weapon is just as powerful. When the pitcher exerts all their strength, the javelin can also penetrate 3 layers of thick plywood in one strike.
3层木板实际上它要比古代的盾牌还要厚一些。
The javelin was the standard weapon used by Roman foot soldiers. They would hurl a round of javelins to kill as many enemy soldiers as possible, so there would be fewer of them to deal with in close combat.
如果被它击中，也是可以一击毙命的。
In the era of cold weapons, javelins and crossbows were the deadliest weapons in use. Both were used as efficient, long-range weapons that gave those wielding them the upper hand on the battlefield. But military strategists needed to strike a balance between offensive and defensive tactics. How was this to be achieved? Even in Rome today, ancient Roman armour is not an unfamiliar sight. Awe-inspiring displays of armour can be found throughout the city. What did ancient armour look like? And why did the Roman legion design it the way they did?
进来以后呢，这里边像是一个罗马的兵器库。
The heavier the armour, the greater its defensive capability. This was especially true if you were protected from head to toe.
铁制的，我们来试一试。哦，所以这个铁围脖。
Not in this way, yeah? This is good for baseball, not for fight. You put in this way, you are like a real Romans. So in this way, the enemy don't take off the helmet, because they try to take off in this way, but it's impossible to take off. So the Roman soldier used 2 kinds of armor. This is very heavy, yes, about 10
很
kilos.
沉，这个
It's good for cut, but it's not protect about the heat. So this is another kind of armor. The name is Lorica segmentata. You can move the armor. Yes, you can move very easy to move, and you can move also in this way.
这样
The body
左右。
is very good for fighting.
Your average swords would never pierce a suit of armour like this. 2,000 years ago, this was some of the best armour in the world.
还是蛮上手的这个状态，相当有分量。这样，他手里边应该是拿着盾牌，实际上这就是可以杀敌了。
At the time, this kind of heavy armour was by far the best in Europe, and with this level of protection, the Roman legion could face any enemy, no matter how strong. It enabled them to win numerous battles without suffering heavy casualties. There were also other underlying reasons for favouring such heavy armour. Although the Roman legion was a very formidable fighting force, they were very often outnumbered, so it was vital to defeat the enemy by drawing out the length of the battle. The main goal was to keep as many soldiers alive as possible for the next battle, and using heavy protective armour was crucial to this. 2,000 years ago, the terracotta warriors also wore armour. It's been proven that each figure in this army was modelled after an actual soldier.
不过呢，它是泥土烧制的。那么真实的秦军的铠甲又是什么样子的呢？
The Qin armour was inspired by a unique idea.
我们看到这个铠甲，它实际上应该是一个陪葬品，是用石头的这个方块连缀而成。实际上呢，真正的铠甲呢，应该是用皮革做成的。
When you try on heavy Roman-style iron armour, it's easy to conclude that the Qin-style leather armour was much lighter. A closer look at it helps you understand why the Qin army chose this type of armour.
用牛皮这一扎一扎这么排列下来，就是一层一层的。所以就像我们生活中有这样的经验，我们切纸的时候，我们要把那个纸摁实了以后，这一刀下去才能切开。但是这个呢，它中间有这个缝隙，有空间，这样的话，它对箭头还是刀剑也好，它有一种瓦解力。
This armour could protect the soldiers just as well as Roman armour. Piercing it would have been very difficult for your everyday arrow or sword. The Qin army could have afforded metal armor, but instead they chose cowhide.
穿那个青铜武士式的，实际上是很笨的。为什么是半身？如果再长，这个士兵他的活动就不方便了。秦国的铠甲就是相对轻便，包括这肩膀，它实际上穿上以后既轻便又活络。说起一个铠甲，它是一个防御武器，但实际上防御武器如果过分了，它会影响进攻。而这个铠甲方便作战，实际上也是有利进攻的。
In warfare, speed is of the essence, so when considering offensive tactics, the Qin army regarded speed as a crucial factor. Their overall strategies were also based on being swift. If they were to crush the much larger forces of the 6 states, speed was essential, and the key to speed was light armor. They were literally racing against time. Victory could only be secured quickly if soldiers went into battle wearing armor that wasn't heavy. The contrast between these two types of armor gives us an understanding of the different strategies used in the East and West. The evolution of heavy and lightweight armor is not only an important part of the history of weaponry, it also highlights the wisdom of adapting to different conditions on the battlefield. Success on the battlefield could be achieved through both heavy and lighter armor, depending on the conditions. How did these two armies mobilize and organize themselves when preparing for battle? The legendary Terracotta Army is famous for its revelation of the mighty power of an ancient fighting force. But this was only one factor in its success.
也就在这儿，隐藏着一个强大军团排兵布阵的奥秘。
So, why have these terracotta warriors been standing in this particular formation for more than 2,000 years?
纵深长是230度，宽是62米，应该有11列，11列、12列，纵横排列。行军作战，从军事角度来讲，这个纵深的阵势，远距离、中距离还近距离。作为这个阵势作战呢，我们可以看，主要是远射出去弓弩手扫过去，弓弩、弓箭，然后就是士兵在战车的这个率领下突击，然后其他士兵啊，这个收割收集。
The fact that the speed of attack varied between different armed units tells us that the Qin army must have adopted a particular operational pace. Based on the formation of the Terracotta Army, we can determine exactly how the Qin army mobilized and went into battle. Just as they appeared on the horizon, the first wave of arrows would rain down, catching the enemy off guard. Then, without leaving the enemy time to regroup, the chariot troops would charge into the enemy, breaking their lines. This would be followed by hand-to-hand combat undertaken by the fearless attack squads. Shortly afterwards, the huge infantry formation would push in, surrounding and annihilating the now exhausted enemy soldiers.
我们可以想象，这个气势是很大的，可以说代表了战国以来中国排兵布阵的最高水平。
The formation employed by the Qin army was based on offensive warfare. They unleashed wave after wave of fierce attacks. But why did they choose this kind of formation? History tells us the answer. The Qin state pursued a clever strategy. The principle was befriending the distant states while attacking the nearer ones. If the 6 states had joined forces, the Qin would not have stood a chance. It was clear they had to defeat the enemy one by one and do so as quickly as possible. A drawn-out battle was the last thing the Qin army wanted. Giving the enemy a chance to join together for a counterattack had to be prevented. What kind of formation did the Roman legion use during the same period? To find out, we first need to take a look at their protective gear.
那么首先我们看到的，这就是罗马人使用的盾牌，方形盾牌。他们当年就是拿着这个去战斗。
Shields were used for self-defense, but shields this big were uncommon. So, how were they used?
那么下面就请这几位朋友给大家演示一下。
The soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder to support each other and used these giant shields to form a moving fortress. This was called the testudo formation, as the soldiers were protected rather like the shell of a turtle. Legend has it that this formation presented the enemy with an insurmountable problem. The testudo offered 360-degree protection. It had no Achilles heel. When implemented correctly, those within the testudo had no fear of arrows or swords. It was even said at the time that a horse could trot on top of the testudo. The Roman legion was composed of many units, but the backbone of the army was, without doubt, the infantry formation, and the number of soldiers in the infantry could account for more than 90% of the entire legion. At the onset of an attack, hundreds of testudos could form various formations depending on the specific battlefield conditions. Slowly but surely, they would advance towards the enemy.
Oh,
Like this.
this is house.
This formation was designed to use maximum defense to weaken the enemy's attack.
这就是龟甲阵。
But how did they come up with the idea? To find out the answer, we need to take a look at an ancient Roman military encyclopedia. In this ancient book, we're told in order to protect themselves, the soldiers gathered their shields around themselves. The testudo was born out of desperation on the battlefield. Historical records reveal that at the beginning of Rome's ascent, the Romans were far too weak to confront their enemies. They could only take a defensive stance and wait for the opportunity to counterattack. As it turned out, however, this was a tactic that worked very well, as they ended up winning victory after victory. After countless enemy attacks, Rome was the last power standing. And the reason the Romans were able to conquer the West was because they attached so much importance to defense. The roles of attack and defense were, of course, unpredictable as they constantly changed. They gave birth to two different military practices, one in the East, the other in the West. They were two extreme expressions of the art of war. Horse and chariot burial sites from the Western Zhou dynasty are few and far between, so this is a scene few tourists ever get a chance to see. What we see preserved here are relics of the force that dominated China's ancient battlefields.
这就是车马坑，这个就是4匹马，这就是战车，
现在大家看到这个是保存最完整的一个，
那太珍贵了。
咱们下去看。
These burials prove that more than 1,000 years before the Qing dynasty, chariots were already a benchmark of military strength. So what were these ancient Chinese chariots actually like?
1、2、3、4， 4匹马，马匹数越多，它的动力越大。
很多的青铜器具，上边那个是打额头的，在这个鼻梁上就是走过来。一方面它可以固定绳索，但是更重要的可能就是防护，就是防护打伤。所以我们看这个车的分量很大，车的这个宽度1步、2步、3步，近4步，差不多近4米，很宽。它是越野的，它要是在田野打仗，不能在马路上。
你看它的轮子很大的
轮子，它是稳当。路况崎岖不平，这大轱辘就有点像装甲车那坦克的履带似的。
The chariot was obviously very powerful. It was the ancient equivalent of a modern tank. So, how was this invincible piece of military equipment used in battle?
古代打仗站3个人，
中间是驾车的，
左边往往是一个弓箭远射，车右就是大力士，操一个长矛。所以中国的战车作战有个特点，在《诗经》里边有体现，左之左之。为什么左之左之呢？就是这个车战争的形式，就是这儿射的是远射的，远方射。 近距离交战，往左一转，然后大力士拿着枪，你扎我，我扎你，这就算是一个回合。
When an assault was launched from chariots, the battle could be won not only by rampaging through the enemy, but through a variety of other tactics. No one could survive such quick and brutal attacks. For thousands of years, the chariot's ability to sweep the battlefield made it a nightmare for any enemy faced with it. It was a powerful piece of military equipment that ensured numerous victories. In the Warring States period, chariots became even more invincible. Some scholars even state that the chariot was the formidable force that made it possible for the Qin to unify the 6 states.
在文献中讲4母睽睽，4母夜夜，这就是战车的标配。战场中4匹马拉的这种战车，是取它的这种冲击力。
Although it was made of wood, the army chariot of the Qin dynasty weighed more than a ton. Its great strength was due to a method of rope tying that made it easier for the horses to pull the chariot. The result was that the weight of the chariot was carried by the back and shoulder of the horse, enabling the horse to gallop long distances. In other parts of the world, the chariot was attached to the neck and chest, but this way constrained the horse's breathing, and it easily became exhausted. Without doubt, the method employed by the Qin made possible the mighty power of the Chinese chariot. When these chariots in the east were battling the enemy, was the same thing happening in Rome.
这是古代罗马的赛车竞技场，大概有3个足球场大。当年的这个地面要比现在平，而且都是沙石铺地。周边地区呢，古代看台的遗迹还能看到。
While chariots were frequently used in arenas such as this one in ancient Rome, they were rarely used on the battlefield. Why was the chariot used on battlefields in the east, but not in the west? The answer may lie under our feet. In Rome, a piece of land as flat as this is very rare. The Romans fought most of their wars on hilly Mediterranean terrain, where the use of chariots was next to impossible. Roman chariots had small wheels and a narrow body that could only carry a single rider. Most of the time, they could only be used as high-speed vehicles. As they weren't suitable for battlefield attack, they were relegated to the sporting arena. Did the ancient Romans not realize the importance of speed in the tactics of war? The answer, of course, is that they did, and this is the reason they gave up on chariots. Instead of further developing the chariot, the Romans devoted their energy to nurturing a cavalry far earlier than this was done in the East. This eventually gave rise to the often romanticized culture of knights on horseback. The cavalry, with their bows and arrows on galloping horses, were able to sweep away all obstacles in their path, regardless of terrain. They became synonymous with the Mediterranean battlefield. In ancient times, not all types of powerful weapon were suitable for the battlefield. The best way to go was to select armaments that would work well in local conditions. From the chariot wheels of Changan to the iron hooves of Rome, it was all about what worked locally. So, what new developments were about to appear?
"我眼前这座建筑呢，它叫凯旋门。这座历史建筑里边隐含着很多历史的秘密，让我们进来瞧瞧。
It stands to reason that the most prominent position on the triumphal arch should be reserved for heroes, but surprisingly, instead it's the captives that are given prominence. The Romans carved in stone images of captured enemy leaders to remind everyone that they were great conquerors. Whenever a triumphant army returned home, the legionnaires marching through this magnificent edifice with their trophies of war were received by crowds in rapture at their achievements. Victory in war was the pride and glory of ancient Roman society. Rome's highest honors were earned on the battlefield. Ordinary Roman citizens who desired a prosperous future knew that they had to fight for it on the battlefield. It all depended on military success. But what exactly could be achieved by this route? We can see from these ancient images that the first thing to be gained from acquitting oneself well on the battlefield was wealth. Under the law, successful soldiers could be awarded trophies, and many soldiers acquired wealth in this way after major victories. In addition, after military reforms during the 2nd century BCE, legionnaires could be granted benefits and a generous amount of land after they retired. It was really a kind of welfare provision for soldiers, but it was far from the greatest benefit of being a soldier. In ancient Rome, recognition of military merit also brought with it social respect, a prerequisite for entering political life and a stepping stone to becoming a member of the social elite. In the Roman Senate, successful legionnaires sometimes accounted for half the total number of senators. Romans were united in their enthusiasm for fighting for their country, because it offered the possibility of wealth and social mobility that were otherwise hard to achieve. This ancient triumphal arch is thus much more than a historical site. It was the spiritual home of the warriors of ancient Rome. During the same period, buildings with a similar meaning were being constructed in Qin Dynasty China. They were the starting point from which the Qin army left for battle.
我眼前就是著名的函谷关，在秦统一天下的时候，千军万马正是从这里踏上了征服六国的征程。
However, what few people know is that these invincible soldiers had never been soldiers at all before they traversed this pass. They were farmers whose families had worked the land for generations. At the time, the Qin state was so poor it could not support a massive army. But fortunately for the Qin, someone was about to change the fate of the state and its people. His name was Shang Yang, and his achievements were little short of miraculous.
你好，
这里要查的商君。
哦，好，谢谢。
The secret is in this book.
我现在看的就是著名的商君书，记载了商鞅变法时候的一些具体措施。其中一个很重要的内容就是20军功爵制，杀多少人头可以获得爵位，而这个爵位就是地位的象征，财富的象征。
A later nursery rhyme encapsulates the features of the Qin state's military system. Cut off one head and you will not be a slave. Cut off 10 and you will get land. Cut off hundreds and you will be a lord with gold, house and a title. In other words, a farmer's fate could be transformed if he killed just one enemy soldier. And as you killed more, the higher your social status would become and the greater your wealth.
在2000多年前，这个广大的东方对当时的秦国将士而言，它就不仅仅是山川，也不仅仅是河流，因为他们可以在向东方的厮杀中获得功勋，获得爵位。
The greatest significance of this reward system lay in the way it was enshrined in law to create an army of unprecedented power. For people of the Qin state, military merit far outweighed the wounds caused by warfare, as that merit was accrued. Opportunities on the battlefield could change a warrior's destiny.
所以他们就是在用军功铸造自己的未来。
From Changan to Rome, the military reward systems of both the East and the West produced fierce soldiers. They not only motivated men to be fearless in the face of danger, but also fostered heroic patriotism. However, the acquisition of total power relied on one other crucial factor.
我们知道，古罗马的历史上一直都是能征惯战，有的时候一场战争涉及的人口动辄10几万，那么这就有一个问题，它的后勤问题怎么解决的呢？答案就在我前方的这个柱子上。
This is Trajan's Column, a monument that commemorates the Dacian Wars in the 2nd century AD. Rome assembled the largest army in history to fight these wars, some 150,000 legionnaires. It's been calculated that in the first month alone, 3,975 tons of animal feed and 4,050 tons of equipment were needed. As this war lasted 2 years, the amount of supplies needed was massive. While Rome was obviously powerful enough to afford the expense, how did they get the supplies to the battlefield?
These are two chariots bring the treasure of the Dutch.
刚才馆长讲，这是来自达契亚的东西，这是从达契亚搜来的东西。我们要注意，这个车实际上是一个4轮子的平车，拉辎重的车 ，not horse ox。Yes， 对，实际上这辆车反映了罗马的这种军事运输。
Carriages such as these, loaded with trophies travelling back to Rome, were the same ones that carried supplies and armaments from Rome to the front line. Countless transport carriages were used to accomplish this, and they all needed good roads. The distance from Rome to Dacia was 1,500 kilometres, and this was the real challenge. The Appian Way was built more than 2,000 years ago. It's really not difficult to imagine bullet-drawn carriages travelling along this ancient road.
这条大道到今天还在有汽车来回走。 所以我们如果细看的话，这是千年大道走成沟，罗马的大道并排可以行2架车。 所以罗马人为了经营天下，他是踏踏实实从脚底下做起。而罗马的军队有特点，就是走到哪儿修到哪儿，所以非常扎实。
These roads are still in use today, proving that no expense was spared and that they were constructed to a high standard. A large amount of money was also spent on building a bridge over the Rhine River. All of this was so expensive that Rome's coffers became seriously depleted. But history shows that the investment paid off. As the Roman army didn't have to worry about supplies, its forces were able to take 165 tons of pure gold and 331 tons of silver from their enemies. They also took 230,000 square kilometers of arable land.
通过这种大道呢，我们可以看到罗马人征服天下的脚步。
At the same time the Roman Empire was developing its road network, a famous road in Changan was built. It was called Qin-Zhi-Dao, which translates as the Qin Straight
著
Road.
名的制道实际上是古代的高速公路。
In Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, we find this. The first emperor wanted to travel around the world. But was it really that simple?
前边就到秦直道遗址了。
我们看到的就是这个，实际上是两个山峰夹着一个通道，已经很难想象它是一条大道了。
这个两山之间原来没有底下这么低，
它这个
修路把这个
是挖下去的。
挖下去了。
According to historical records, the Qinzhi Road was more than 800 kilometers long. 300,000 laborers built this broad, straight road on the ravines crisscrossing the Loess Plateau by removing mountaintops and filling in the valleys between them.
就是我们从文献上看，宽的地方是60米，窄的是20米，这就是跑几辆大车都没有问题了。
Today, a modern 8-line highway is at most 40 meters wide. The great width of the Qin-Zhi-Dao suggests that it was not built for the sole use of the emperor. The first emperor of the Qin dynasty was a great military strategist. He must have had other reasons for building this road, besides simply the desire to see the world.
我们复原了一部分，去看一下。好，
好，走
走。
这种宽度的马路在全世界在当时是非常罕见的。大量的军事物资可以畅行啊，就实际上是当时为了北方的战备，这是一条很著名的军事大道。
This Qin highway connected the rear area of Xianyang with the Great Wall front line in the He-Tao region. Its purpose, the transportation of military supplies, couldn't be more obvious. Records show the great expansion in Qin territory was all due to the strong logistical capabilities of the Qin highway. These achievements included the Qin attacking the Huns in the year 215 BCE and Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty sending an expedition northwest against the Huns in the year 127 BCE. 2,000 years ago, the cost of this mega project would have been immense, but thanks to this road, China was able to expand its territory in the northwest. All roads lead to Rome, and it was the same with the roads in Chang'an. Walking on this 1,000-year-old road, one can better comprehend that the key to success for the most powerful in the East and the West was always being prepared. Where would their journey lead them next? A long-distance race 2,500 years ago honored a Greek soldier who became the most famous messenger in history. That race gave birth to the modern marathon. But was this messenger marathon really the only way military information was transmitted in ancient times? The ancient Romans understood that marathon-style running was not adequate on its own for the efficient transmission of information. And that is why this building we see here came to be built.
这个白色的石头建筑就是阿皮亚大道上的一个军事要塞，它的一个很重要的作用就是它是一个驿站。
Ancient Rome's sprawling network of roads defined the advantages of its transportation system, and this was why the Roman Empire established a postal system that covered the entire empire using messengers and soldiers on horseback. While there was nothing unusual about the cavalry sending letters, there was something unique about all of this. It is recorded that ancient Rome had a complete messenger system in place as early as the 1st century BCE, and that after that, countless small military stations were established. Dotted along each road, the major function of these stations was to serve military campaigns by mobilizing the cavalry to dispatch messages day and night through a relay system. The system was run like a tight race. Messages could travel 300 kilometers in a single day. 2,000 years ago, it was an unprecedented speed. However, the life of a soldier relaying messages was a dangerous one. Weren't the Romans concerned that their messages concerning military intelligence would be intercepted by the enemy? In point of fact, they weren't. Records reveal that the Romans developed a secret code known as the Caesar Code Table. The principle was to replace the original content with different letters following a code that was constantly changed. Codes might seem obvious today, but at that time it was effective. As long as the meaning of the text could not be deciphered, the enemy could do nothing, so there was little point in trying to get hold of the messages. While the Romans deployed technical skills such as codes to pass on military information, the ancient Chinese adopted a very different method.
这怎么走过去啊？这也不行，这是黄泥道，这是。
Unlike roads in Italy, this road in Shanxi is just too muddy when it rains. People in ancient times would have found roads like this one just as difficult. So, without good roads, how did they manage to send urgent military information?
传说呀，周幽王烽火戏诸侯，通过点烟火的方式传信。这里边涉及到一种军事制度，就是用烽火传递信息。
Occupying a territory more vast than that of the Romans, ancient China did not have a well-built road network like the Romans had. They needed a smarter way to send military information quickly. Beacon towers had very definite advantages.
古代没有电子设备，怎么办呢？我们的古人想到了一个办法：白天用点烟的方式，晚上用点火的方式，在山头上建很多这样的烽火台。然后呢，此处一点烟或者一放火，远处就看到了。这样的话，就一力而行，接连不断地把消息传到远方。
The beacon tower has been used for thousands of years, from the Spring and Ottoman Warring States period right up to modern times. In the Qin dynasty, they were spread all along the border area during the construction of the Great Wall. But why did the Qin rely on them so much? Historical records describe how a well-designed signal system between the beacons worked. It was known in ancient times as the transmission method. Smoke of various shapes and colours and flares of different shades conveyed different information. It was the ancient equivalent of Morse code, and as long as the code was kept secret, the enemy would not know what the signal meant.
而这种传递信息的速度是非常快的，比这个直升飞机传达速度还要快一些。
From the mountains to the plains and from the hinterland to more central areas, it was this military intelligence relayed by beacon towers that made possible a line of defense that spanned thousands of miles in northern China, unifying its military might. In world history, it was a rare achievement. For those in power in ancient times in both the East and the West, it was the transmission of military intelligence that made it possible to understand the enemy and fight hundreds of battles without suffering defeat. But there were still other challenges ahead.
"这片海就是地中海，在罗马强盛的时候，地中海曾经是罗马帝国的内海。
But before the famous Battle of Mylae in the year 260 BCE, the Romans wouldn't have dared to even imagine such a thing. That battle changed everything. Looking out on this enormous sea, it's easy to imagine how sailors in the newly formed Roman navy must have felt when confronted with the maritime power of Carthage. The relative strength of the Romans and Carthaginians was poles apart. The navy of Carthage consisted of 130 large warships, while Rome had just 100 boats, which were much smaller. It would have been like putting a champion boxer up against a novice who had never been in the ring before. Carthage had all the trump cards. What transpired was almost impossible. The Roman navy fearlessly charged straight towards the Carthage fleet. It was totally unexpected. After half a day, the Romans won that first battle, destroying 50 enemy ships and capturing another 70. It was an astonishing reversal of fortunes. It seemed the Romans had the gods on their side. What really turned the tide was nothing more than a simple device consisting of hooks and wooden boards. It was a suspension bridge called a corvus. At the time, the Romans had little knowledge of naval warfare, but they did have a very powerful army, and inside the cabins of the boats were hiding soldiers in full armor. When the enemy ships got close enough, they used their tools to create suspension bridges, turning a naval war into the kind of hand-to-hand combat situation normally seen only on land. In an instant, the Carthaginian soldiers familiar only with the tactics of maritime combat fell into disarray.
就是这场海战成为罗马人崛起争霸西方历史的开端。
At the same time, on a battlefield in the east, the fate of millions of people was determined on a small hilltop.
这个山岭在附近的山头，它是一个制高点。据《史记》记载，长平之战的前哨战就是在这里发生。
In its battle to unify the six states, the Qin faced a multitude of obstacles. In the year 262 BCE, a very powerful adversary arose, the fierce state of Zhao. It's said that a total of more than 1 million troops were mobilized to fight in Changping, and that was about a sixth of the combined populations of Qin and Zhao. Qin gambled everything on winning by deploying 650,000 troops. It simply couldn't afford to fail. We're about to visit the ancient battlefield to see what happened. In the months leading up to the war, neither side advanced on the other, but no one could have expected the deadlock would be broken in the way it was.
秦有一队侦察兵来到这里，当时赵军在山头修了军事据点，大概犯了轻敌的毛病，下来和秦国的赤兵发生激战，结果不想赵军败了，而且严重的是什么？他失去了这个制高点，这样的话，廉颇必须得重新部署，由此赵军呢变得被动了。
The Qin used this small-scale victory to their advantage. They spread propaganda that stated the Zhao forces had behaved like cowards. News of this provoked the king of Zhao to take action, ordering the Zhao troops to go on the offensive. They had no inkling that they were being enticed into a Qin trap. Changping was about to witness many deaths.
老师，您看高平这个周围，现在还保存的有10几个这样的坑。
没有下半身，另外这儿是受过伤，所以这整个是当时这个战场，真是尸骨遍野。
是的，是的。
When the Zhao troops were finally drawn out in force, the Qin army feigned defeat. Tricked by this, the entire enemy army was enticed into a huge ambush. In the Battle of Changping, Qin forces swept away the enemy and took the first step towards the goal of conquering the other states. Although this ancient age of warfare is now history, the military strategies of leaders in both East and West ensured the continuation of their civilizations for thousands of years. From Changan to Rome, this part of our journey is coming to an end. But it will resume so that we can learn more about the history of humankind and its legendary accomplishments.